Just like you, I cannot believe it's already August, and that means there is some kind of Apple fall event right around the corner. Which begs the question, is there going to be changes made to the non-iPad Pro models? And that is exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be going over what could happen with the baseline iPad, the iPad Air, and the iPad Mini, going over some leaks and rumors, and also speculating about things myself. Again, speculating. This is a speculation video. I'm not promising anything. I'm not going to guarantee anything. I'm just going to observe patterns and previous iPad releases in order to best predict, what Apple is going to do this fall with iPad within reason. And real quick before we start, to my fans, I just got on Twitter, so please feel free to follow my baby little Twitter account that I just created. I know I've been living under a rock. I just haven't been paying attention to any other social media besides YouTube. I'm just starting to branch out. So if you want to hear from me beyond my YouTube videos, feel free to follow me there. And on Instagram, I'll leave links in the video description. All right, so first up, we got to talk about what's in store for a potential iPad 9th generation. And I have an 8th gen right here, which I'm going to use as a reference and also to reference my notes, because if I don't, we're going to be here all night. So this update could go one of three ways. We could see the same chassis with a different or updated processor. We could see a different chassis with an updated processor, or we could see a different chassis with the same processor that's in the 8th gen. And of course, I will further elaborate on all of this. And if we're stuck with the same chassis, it's probably going to be identical to that of the 7th and the 8th gen, which are, I think, indistinguishable from each other as it is. Apple probably has a lot of these lying around, so they might as well just reuse this and throw a better processor in, which is exactly what they did last year with the 8th gen. And of course, we have the air gap. It's a bit thicker. It's not as refined as the Air 3, but yeah, they might have a stockpile of these, and it might make sense to continue to use them and sell them. And with that said, I also want to add that they're probably not going to change the screen size if this is the outcome. 10.2 inches has been standard since 2019, and it's a decent size display. It also sort of differentiates this from the iPad Air 4, which is more premium, and of course the iPad Pro, which is the most expensive. So yeah, again, it would make sense for them to continue to use this sort of platform and not make really any changes to it other than internal changes. And speaking of internals, Apple may reuse or re-implement the A12 processor into the 9th gen, albeit if the chassis is different or if there's some distinguishable external difference, because otherwise they'd be selling the same tablet, just rebranded. And I say this because from the 6th to the 7th gen iPads, even though the chassis got bigger with the newer generation, it still featured the A10 Fusion, which was found in the 6th gen. So they've had 2 generations of iPad with the same chip. You also have to keep in mind that there's a chip shortage, and Apple also implements the A12 into Apple TV 4K units, so it would make sense for them to re-implement it. It's also plenty powerful for, this level of iPad. The A12 is going to be a great processor for the next couple years for basic tasks like web surfing and student-oriented tasks and, like little kids gaming. You know what I mean? Like, it would make sense for them to re-implement it logistically and, from a hardware standpoint, and also just making money. If they don't need to implement the A13 or an A14 if they don't have to, and they can save those chips for higher end or mid-tier products. So yeah, essentially based off of my analysis of Apple's previous iPad releases, A14 is very unlikely to show up this early in the iPad 9th gen, likely the 10th gen if at all. The A13 could show up if Apple needs to resell the same iPad chassis and justify doing so. And again, my best bet is that Apple's basically going to rebrand the iPad Air 3 as the 8th gen, because what they're going to do is they're going to use this chassis and put the A12 in there because they've carried over the same processor 2 years over. It would make sense to do it this year as well. So that should be interesting. Maybe Apple has a bunch of iPad Air 3s that they never sold, so they're just going to rebox them and call them iPad 8th gen. Who knows? But regardless, it's going to be good for the consumer because this is a fantastic tablet, and if Apple decides to sell it for $300 to $329, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a steal even in 2021 and 2022. Next up, let's talk about what may be in store for potential iPad Air 5 refresh. And I think it's gonna happen because Apple refreshed the iPad Air 3 in 2019 and the iPad Air 4 in 2020 with this whole redesigned iPad Pro situation, which also leads me to believe that if there is a refresh this year, it's gonna be very minimal because they already did the huge overhaul last year. If anything, there's gonna be a couple spec bumps and some smaller external changes. First up, I think that Apple's gonna implement some new colors because after all, these are being targeted at young people, like a colorful crowd, if you know what I mean. I'm one to talk. Yeah, Apple tends to do this so you can differentiate newer products from old ones. They did this with the iPhone 11 up from the 10R. The iPhone 11 series had different colors opposed to the 10R, even though those devices look very, very similar. And in fact, I would argue that the iPad Air 5 refresh is gonna look a lot like the iPhone 10R to the iPhone 11 progression, in that the iPhone 11 got a newer processor, so will the iPad Air, the newest iPhone processor for that matter, which will be the A15 Bionic or whatever Apple wants to call it. And the iPad Air 5 is also likely to receive a dual lens and sensor setup, which is exactly what the iPhone 11 got, up from a single lens and sensor setup from the iPhone 10R, which is just like what's in the iPad Air 4. And while an ultra-wide lens and sensor is definitely a nice feature, you know, I definitely use mine from time to time, I think Apple's implementing it more so they can justify selling you a newer tablet, especially to those who aren't hell-bent on, you know, CPU performance and won't really know the difference between an A14 and an A15. But if a device has an additional camera, then it has to be better, right? Although something that won't be in that camera setup is LiDAR. I think that that's more of an experimental feature that's going to be, you know, saved for the iPad Pro line. You know, people who are buying iPad Pro like technology as it is, and their demographic is more likely to experiment with AR type stuff, you know, depth sensing and sort of scanning things, for example. It's a very cool feature, but it's definitely more niche like the iPad Pro. And lastly, I think 5G connectivity is coming to the iPad Air 5, which is becoming an increasingly nice or nifty feature because 5G is getting better. You know, 5G is expanding and people tend to keep their iPads for years anyway. So if you're gonna keep your iPad Air 5 for 3+ years, you know, you're gonna be better able to take advantage of that bandwidth when it gets better and when it comes to your, you know, geologically. Basically, what I'm saying is if you have 5G capable hardware and 5G gets better in your area, you're gonna be thankful that you have it. You know, 5G hardware is getting more and more warranted, I would say, and it's gonna definitely be a welcome addition in the Air 5 and any, you know, iPads that come after it. And finally, let's touch on the third most interesting, in my opinion, and least predictable iPad in this discussion, the iPad Mini 6, or whatever Apple is gonna wanna call this. And I mean it when I say unpredictable. There are very inconsistent leaks and rumors surrounding this device. Nobody really knows exactly what Apple's gonna do with it because they haven't updated it year over year. The last time they touched this was 2019, and before then, 2014, I believe. So I'm gonna put on what I'm gonna call here the suit of speculation. I'm totally not ripping off of iUpdate's humor. Shout out to Sam for making Tech YouTube funny. Because yeah, I don't know and I don't wanna promise anything. So I'm wearing the suit. You know, this is all speculation. I'm gonna give you my best educated guess as to what a next-gen iPad mini is gonna look like. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I think that there are two possible outcomes for a refreshed iPad mini. We might see something with the same chassis with the new processor or a new chassis with the new processor. And I've excluded the new chassis, same processor outcome because Apple has already implemented the best legacy design into the iPad mini, which is the iPad Air 3 design, but shrunk. And I really doubt that Apple would implement, you know, a newer chip into an iPad Pro style design language, which would be the new chassis. If the iPad mini is gonna be iPad Pro-ified or iPad Air-ified, it would feature the iPad Air's design with Touch ID in the home button. I really highly doubt Apple would implement Face ID unless it was like an iPad mini Pro. In that case, that would make more sense. But yeah, I kind of think that Apple is going to give the iPad mini the iPad Air treatment, which would be nice. No home button, albeit no headphone jack, but USB-C. So yeah, this would really fulfill a lot of the iPad mini Pro users' dreams, you know, of like a really small, you know, compact iPad Pro-like device. It would also feature a bigger screen, rumored at 8.4 inches without the home button, so that makes sense. We also might see stereo speakers in the next gen mini if it does indeed get the iPad Air 4 design overhaul. We also will probably see 5G connectivity if that's implemented into the Air 5. And I'm really hoping that Apple implements the Apple Pencil 2nd gen into this device. And curiously enough, this is just purely my speculation. As you can see here, this side of the iPad mini is completely blank. That might be the case even if it does get the industrial slab tab design of the Air 4 and the Pro. But look, this fits perfectly there. It also conveniently magnetically attaches because there are magnets here for, you know, like the smart cover and stuff like that. So I could see them, you know, making this device compatible with that and able to charge it. That'd be cool because it would make this sort of like the small, you know, flip open notebook, little note-taking like what do you even call those? Just small notebooks. You know, there's probably a name, Ditto pad, memo pad, whatever. This could replace that, which would be cool. Maybe Apple will make a smaller pencil to accommodate this, and maybe that smaller pencil could also find its way into an iPhone. Who knows? That's just my guess, you know, of course, purely based off speculation. That's why I'm wearing the speculation suit. You cannot take my word for it here. But yeah, this would be really cool, and it would make it, you know, once again, a small notebook replacement, just like the iPad Air 4 and the Air 5 and the iPad Pro sort of replace, you know, bigger sheets of paper or bigger notebooks for students and canvases in some cases for artists. As for the processor situation, once again, I don't think an A12 is going to be in here because I don't think that Apple can resell it in the same chassis, and I don't think they'd implement it into a newer looking iPad Pro style chassis. So my guess is the A13 or the A15 may find its way into here. If Apple keeps the same chassis, they might implement the A13, which was once again found in the iPhone 11, or the A14, which still exists and is in the iPhone 12, which is about to be outdated or last gen, and the iPad Air 4, which is about to be outdated or last gen if the Air 5 comes out. Or the A15 might be put in here if Apple decides to give this the whole iPad Air 5 treatment. And that is my best guess, honestly, because this was treated the same way the iPad Air 3 was when it was launched. It's basically a miniaturized iPad Air 3 minus the smart connectors. So that is my best guess. But once again, if Apple decides to keep the same chassis, they're gonna have to put a better, beefier processor in there. Otherwise, it's gonna be the same iPad mini, and they can't sell that as a new product. And that about wraps things up here. I hope this video was helpful. And again, these are just my thoughts, my predictions, my own speculation, albeit based off of, you know, logic and pattern analysis and just looking at the past, but I can't, you know, guarantee anything. So we'll just have to see what Apple does with iPad in the fall. Leave a comment if you have an alternate, you know, prediction or anything to add as well. I'd love to hear from you. I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like, comment, and of course subscribe for more content like this. Also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, linked in the video description. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.